But there's a couple of verses out of Exodus 19 I was wanting to highlight here. Just the importance of this way of life that he calls for his people. It says, "Now then, if you listen closely to my voice and keep my covenant, then you will be my own treasure from among all people, for all the earth is mine. So as for you, you will be to me a kingdom of Kohanim and a holy nation. And these are the words which you are to speak to Bnei Israel." And over the course of the next chapter, next couple of chapters, they get to see what happens, on the mountain. In the morning of the third day there was thundering and lightning and thick cloud on the mountain, the blast of an exceedingly loud shofar, and all the people in the camp trembled. And then later it says, "Now the entire Mount Sinai was in smoke, because ADONAI had descended upon it in fire. The smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace. The whole mountain quaked greatly. When the sound of the shofar grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him with a thunderous sound." And then chapter 20, it says, "All the peoples witnessed the thundering and the lightning, and the sound of the shofar, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood far off." And so here we are, where the Jewish people around the world have been counting the 7 weeks, 7 Sabbaths, 49 days since the celebrating of the Exodus, of the Passover, all those different things. So here we are at Shavuot, Feast of Weeks, long before we ever tried to call it Pentecost in the traditional Christian life of things. The Jewish people had been doing this for 1,500 years. So this was a standard part of the biblical calendar. And then when we get to Acts chapter 2, it says, when the day of Shavuot had come, they were all together in one place. And there's some symbolism and things here that should be reminiscent to what we read just a moment ago in Exodus 19 and 20. "Suddenly there came from heaven a sound like a mighty rushing wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. And tongues like fire spreading out appeared to them and settled on each of them. They were all filled with the Ruach HaKodesh and began to speak in other tongues as the Ruach enabled them to speak out." It says, "Now Jewish people were staying in Jerusalem, devout men from every nation under heaven. And when this sound came, the crowd gathered. They were bewildered because each was hearing them speaking in his own language." I mean, instead of the loud voices, instead of that's how it's traditionally understood. It's the sound of voices. The 70 languages were going out on Mount Sinai. But instead of driving people away and keeping people at a distance, this one was causing people to be gathered. It was drawing them closer. So these devout men from every nation were there because it was Shavuot, one of those pilgrimage feasts, one of those 3 times that they were supposed to present themselves before ADONAI. One of the names of Shavuot is Atzeret Shel Pesach, which means the completion of Passover. So these things are connected. These are all part of those spring feasts. Messiah Yeshua, he dies on Passover to atone for sin. He rises from death to overcome death at the Feast of First Fruits. Then there's the coming of the Ruach HaKodesh, completes the work that the Passover Lamb's death on the cross accomplished. This Spirit of God indwelling us gives us the power that we need to overcome our tendency to evil, right? That's still there. The Spirit of God causes us, as we read about in Ezekiel, to walk in His laws. It empowers us to do that in ways that we didn't really even have the desire to do before. And when you think about it, how did the Creator bring the first lump of dirt to life? He breathes on it, right? He breathes on it. Shavuot is this time when the Torah was given on Mount Sinai. Those commands are supposed to be our life. And by them we will live, and the Spirit causes us to walk in them, so we keep His commands and do them. So it's, He breathes upon us. The Spirit breathes upon us, causes us to be obedient to His Torah, both the written and the living. So we have the two loaves of challah bread, the shetei halachem. That's what these are for. That's what these are up here. And some talk about them representing the 12 tribes of Israel in the same way that they would have the shoulder pieces on the high priest's robes. Others talk about them as symbolic of the two sticks that are returning before the Lord. They're made into one. Y'all remember those accounts? Others say they represent the two tablets of the Ten Commandments. We talk about them in the Tanakh and the Brit Hadashah. Of course, we typically understand them as two peoples that make up of the body of Messiah, both Jew and Gentile, who come together before the Father, and they are presented as a wave offering before Him, and so they are accepted. And if I understand it correctly, these are waved before the Lord, just like a lot like the lulav and the etrog at Sukkot, right? How does that work? You start going off towards the east, right? Then it goes south, which is that way. Okay, see, I'm turned around in here. And then to the north, or to the west. West is that way. That's the west, in the north. And then it's also up, and it's down, right? Because He is Lord of all the earth. I'm turned around in here. But that's really what this is supposed to be. He is Lord of all. He is the source of all abundance, of the harvest. We as His people have been gathered from the four directions of the earth, north, south, east, and west, from every nation, tribe, and tongue. And so they were bewildered because each one was hearing them speaking in his own language. Wherever they came from, they were able to hear what was being spoken and what was being said. When you look at this from Leviticus, it says, "You are to count from the morrow after the Shabbat, from the day that you brought the Omer of the wave offering, 7 complete Shabbatot, until the morrow after the 7th Shabbat. You are to count 50 days, and then present a new grain offering to ADONAI. You are to bring out of your houses 2 loaves of bread for a wave offering, made of the 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour. They are to be baked with chametz, as first fruits to ADONAI." So that's what these things are. It says that the Kohen is to wave them with the bread of the first fruits as a wave offering before ADONAI with the 2 lambs. They should be holy to ADONAI for the Kohen, right? Another interesting angle on this is the 2 harvests that this represents. The counting of the Omer started with the first fruits of the barley harvest, and that's during unleavened bread, right? And it's essentially ending with the first fruits of the wheat harvest. So what's strange is it starts out as unleavened, has ended leavened. And that seems backwards to us, especially since we've got it so stuck in our mind about the symbolism of leaven being what? Being sin. It doesn't make sense to start without sin and then end full of sin. That's just kind of the weird thinking that we go through. But it must mean something else in this context. In some ways you could look at it as the sense that the bread starts small, right? And then it finishes expanded and maxed out. It starts flat. It started with the making of the bread in haste, but the leavened bread shows that they don't have to be in such a hurry. They don't have to bake it in haste. It has time to grow and to rise. And if you think about them as the idea of breath. I shared this a couple years ago, I think. But if you think about them as lungs, and they kind of almost look like it in some respect, but we apparently go through about 2,000 gallons worth of air every day, and so your lungs are shrinking and expanding constantly, enough to fill a swimming pool. They said a man's lungs can hold about 6 liters of air, or 3 large soda bottles. When you exhale, what happens to your lungs? They shrink, right? They decrease in size. That's like the flat unleavened bread of Passover. But what happens to you if your lungs don't have any air in them? What's going to eventually happen to you? You're going to pass out, right? You're not going to survive for very long. You have to have breath in order to come to life. And the Spirit of God is breathed into us, upon us. And that brings us to life. That's again, what did the first believers in Yeshua receive? The Spirit of God breathed upon us. Breathe that power into us. What was shriveled up with no life, no breath, no air, has been filled with the Spirit of God. And so with that, we're also supposed to have this holy assembly, a convocation. But again, a convocation is just another reminder that we are not living, in the kingdom at this moment. We're not living for our own kingdom, but for God's kingdom. It's a reminder of where we're going in the future. It says you are to make a proclamation on the same day that there is to be a holy convocation. Shall do no regular work. This is a statute forever in all your dwellings throughout your generations. So again, how long is this supposed to last? Forever. Doesn't matter what country you live in or where you live. No, in all your dwellings, this is supposed to be the case. It's supposed to be an unending event for God's people. What's interesting about this passage, when you look at verse 22, it has its connection to the harvest. It says, when you reap the harvest of your land, you are not to reap to the furthest corners of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Rather, you are to leave them for the poor and the outsider. I am ADONAI, your God. That's the connection of Shavuot. It's also a matter of provision for those who are poor and those who are needy. And I pictured this a couple years ago as if you think of this as a nice orderly field, because all fields are a perfect rectangle, right? But if you think of that as a field, what's supposed to be left? What are you not supposed to glean? You're not supposed to take from the corners, right? What does that remind you of? So ADONAI spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Bnei Israel and say to them that they are to make for themselves tzit-tzit in the corners of their garments. Throughout their generations, they are to put this blue cord on each tzit-tzit. And it will be your own tzit-tzit. Whenever you look at them, you will remember all the commands, all the mitzvot of ADONAI, and do them, and not go spying out after your own hearts or your own eyes and prostituting yourselves. In this way, you will remember and obey all my mitzvot, and you will be holy to your God. I am ADONAI, your God. I brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am ADONAI, your God. So with those prayer shawls, the corners of the garments, right? They're supposed to remind us of the commandments, to keep them. And of course, Shavuot is a part of all of that. But it's that Shavuot included in that is the command about harvesting the corners of the field. The corners are where you tie the tzit-tzits, the tassels, those fringes. Those are like the gleanings. The poor and those in need are to be blessed by coming and gathering and taking hold of the gleanings of those things left behind. It's just like the woman who was bleeding for 12 years that came to the hem of his garments, the tassels of Messiah. This is where we go for healing and provision. There was a woman with a blood flow for 12 years who could not be healed by anyone. She came up from behind and touched the tzit-tzit of Yeshua's garment, and immediately the blood flow stopped. That's how we all must be. Right? We are truly desperate for healing. All of us are poor. All of us are poor in spirit, aren't we? We are lacking the righteousness that is required. And after all else has failed, we go and take hold of his tzit-tzit because we have nowhere else to go. It's as if we are gleaning from his field and taking hold of him as we were always meant to do. Right? He has left us the abundance of his field. It's like Zechariah. Indeed, many peoples and powerful nations will come to seek ADONAI Tzavaot in Jerusalem and to entreat the favor of ADONAI. And thus says ADONAI Tzavaot, in those days it will come to pass that 10 men from every language of the nations, again, what were the people hearing in Acts chapter 2? They were hearing all the different languages. Will grasp the corner of the garment of a Jew, saying, let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. That is something that is coming in the future in terms of the harvest that is to come. But it's also something that has happened in the past. We take hold of the tzit-tzit, of the Messiah. Let us go with you. It's plural. Both Yeshua and Isaiah talk about the gathering from the four corners. We are to take hold of him and go with him. Isaiah talked about it. It says, he will lift up a banner for the nations and assemble the dispersed of Israel and gather the scattered of Judah from the four corners of the earth. It's like the whole earth is like his field that he has scattered his people out to. You see it in Mark chapter 13. It says, then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory, and then he will send out the angels and will gather together his chosen from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the end of heaven. So as we see this time of gathering, of harvest, as the Jewish people are gathered from the four corners of the earth, they are to let those from the nations go with them. The poor and the outsider to take hold of the corners, the gleanings of their garments. The Gentile believers are to want to take hold of it. And so that harvest, which starts out flat at unleavened bread, what does what? It expands and it grows and is filled up in its fullness. That's what Shavuot is supposed to be a picture of. It's a picture of the promise of the harvest that is to come and the expansion of that harvest to everyone who believes and who trusts in him. That's what it's supposed to be.